Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy and The Long Ride Home. Before I jump in with today's guest, I want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do here, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really, really helps us to make the progress. To find out about our certification courses, online video libraries, books, and other courses, please go to rupertisaacson.com. So now let's jump in. Today on Live Free, Ride Free, I've got Lainie Liberti. Lainie is still living with her son Miro, an extraordinary life. She hit the road some years ago with him as a child, if you like, world homeschooling, and never stopped. Has now built a whole sort of universe of mental health services for teens and tweens, working with the brain, working with the endocrine system, working with all of these things, and has turned this grand adventure into something really of benefit to everybody, including a lot of teens and tweens back in the USA where she started from. So joining me from Guanajuato in Mexico, very colorful on the other end of my Zoom, is Lainie Liberti. Lainie, thanks for coming on. Tell us, why the bleep did you do what you did?
Yikes. I mean, that's such a great way to open up this conversation. Why did I do what I did? I suppose, I mean, there were like all these external reasons why we took the leap into this lifestyle, but there were also these internal ones. And like I'll sort of talk a little bit about both of those worlds throughout our conversation because they're both really, really important to this story and the story of supporting others. Um, I guess from a real, sort of narrative perspective, 2008, I'm living in California. I'm a single parent to a nine-year-old child at that time and always wanted to be a mom, always, that was the dream, to be a parent. And I did everything that I could to provide, a wonderful life for my child. I worked in advertising for almost 18 years. And the last 8 of those years, I owned my own agency. And I was overworked. I was making great money. I was overworked. I spent most of my time working, but in my mind, it was so I could provide everything for my child, for my family. I was the provider. And to me, some things were out of whack because my son would always say to me, "Mom, you're always working. You never spend any time with me." And the heartbreak from those words were deep. And so I didn't have this internal balance of why I was doing what I was doing and kind of being able to be present in my own life. And in 2008, the economy crashed. So that was one of the first external reasons. Well, the first external reason really was the voice of my child saying, "You're always working. You never spend any time with me." But the second was having an economy crash in California. And my agency was primarily focused on serving green eagle companies and nonprofits. And I started to see them go away one by one by one. And I knew by the end of 2008, I was not, after I said goodbye to my staff for the holidays, I knew I wasn't bringing them back. I just couldn't. I didn't have the business to support them. And one night late in the office, my 9-year-old child in the office with me somewhere around 9 p.m. And I just remember stopping whatever I was working on. And I turned to him and I said, "Miro, what do you think if we just got rid of all this stuff and went and had an adventure?" And he was playing a video game at the time. And I remember he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Seriously?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Do I have to go to school?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'm in." And that was really it. And that became, we suddenly had a vision, purpose, something, a reason for all of this. There was, I wasn't going to mourn the loss of my business. I was just going to make a whole new trajectory for us. And when you're living a conventional life, 1 year adventure sounds tremendous. It sounds like a really long time. Like, oh my gosh, planning out a whole year seems
So initially it
incredible.
was just going to be a year.
That's it. And we decided to plan, okay, we're here on this continent. Let's just head south. Let's go, we're in LA, California. Let's go to Mexico and then head down through Central America, all the way down and end up in Ushuaia, which is the tip of Argentina. Let's do that. And he's like, yeah, that sounds like a cool adventure. And I figured we could do that in a year. So we had a plan, we had a direction, but we really wanted to be able to make decisions together. And we spoke, it took us 6 months to prepare and plan. And the whole thing was about this partnership. This wasn't going to be about me pulling him or him pushing me one way. We were going to do this side by side. And that was the thing that he was really craving. He wanted me to spend time with him. And partnership looked really different to me when we were on the road. Like we could create this thing that we both wanted. We both could research. We could both deal with the budgets. We both could make decisions about where we were going and when we were going and how long we stayed. We both could, come up with what we wanted to do. We didn't have those restrictions. This was going to be our side by side journey together. And that we agreed on way before we left. And that became one of the foundations of our journey and much into the work that I do now. It was this side by side journey we call partnership. A lot of that was driven from like the work that I did in branding and marketing. I worked with companies where I'd go in and help them define their brand and do these brand discoveries and positioning and all these things. And I thought, well, one of the tools that I had in my tool belt was teaching teaching companies how and facilitating how to really define what their core values are by looking at the things that they're what their brand personality is, the services, their relationship to their customers. And I decided to use that tool with my son. So, okay, let's discover and define what our core values are. And that way we didn't have to have rules. Core values were the thing that were going to guide us. So once we defined what each individual core values were, we can define what our family core values were. And that allowed us to be free to say yes when things were in alignment and no when they were not. It wasn't a rule, it was a partnership where we were both looking out for each other in that way. And so a lot of that stuff, the internal sort of processing and looking at the external sort of situation allowed us to have a guidance system that worked. And it required a lot of conversation, a lot of negotiation, a lot of emotional intelligence, a lot of, trial and error. So that became a good part, the foundation of our travels when we first started out. And I do want to mention this story of our plan setting out for 1 year with our trajectory to Argentina. Well, it's been 16 years and we still haven't made it to Argentina, but we have been around the world several times and so many adventures since. So I don't know where you want to take it from there.
Well, okay. First obvious question. There you are, young single mother, young woman with a child, therefore quite vulnerable, both heading down into, parts of the world that can be tricky. You're got a good head on your shoulders, so you must have been aware of the risks. What was your plan and how did you negotiate those waters? That's the first thing. And how did you actually physically travel? How were you doing it? Were you in a vehicle? Were you doing it on buses and trains? How did you go? But then the other question really is, at what point did you decide, actually, no, this is not a year, this is a life?
Yeah. Well, let me answer the last question first.
Okay.
And then I'll go back to the mode of travel and my relationship to fear. Okay.
Yeah.
So fast forward 8.5 months into our travels. One of the agreements that my son and I made before we set out was let's say yes to everything. Let's just say yes. As long as, of course, the caveat, it was in alignment with our core values and it was safe, right? Let's just say yes. Because I had spent the first 9 years of my son's life not saying yes because I had to work. As
Yeah.
I said a lot of no's. And I remember the day we were in Guatemala. We had rented this house and we decided we wanted to stay there for a while. And I remember very clearly Miro saying to me, Mom, we're supposed to go home in 4 months. Can't we just do this forever? He sort of tricked me. But we had this deal and, there was really no reason to say no. We were really enjoying our life and it was 8 months in and we were only as far as Guatemala. We decided that slow travel was a little better than fast travel. So of course I said yes, yes. And so we figured out a way to make that happen. But I do want, so that answers your question of why it remained sort of a lifelong journey versus the 1 year that we planned. But going back to your question about mode of travel and our relationship to fear,
Yeah, just straight up security, as someone who's
security,
traveled in a lot of dodgy areas myself in the world, you know that
right?
90% of the time it's fine, but occasionally it's not, and yeah,
Yeah, I do agree. Look, I hitchhiked all over Europe when I was in my 20s. Like, had this experience of trusting the world. And so, when I started this journey 20 years later with my child, I knew that the fear it comes from within, but it's not always grounded in reality. Sometimes it is, but there's also a big difference when you're traveling with a child. Oh, and to answer
absolutely.
your question, actually going back, yeah, we had backpacks and we traveled on bus and trains and yeah, that's it. We didn't have a vehicle.
Yeah.
So we decided where we wanted to go. We looked at the, maps and said, okay, and this bus will go to this town. Do we want to go here? Okay, let's research it. Let's do it. And thank God the internet. When I travel, now it's 40 years ago. When I was in Europe or 35 years ago when I was in Europe, like there was no internet, but at least there was internet when my son and I set out and there was a lot of information. We had our laptops and such. But fear was one of those huge sort of the first year, it was one of those things that was a big part of my journey. It was my relationship to fear. It was really my relationship to making sure that we felt safe and
Well, I
really
mean,
be
because you had to keep him safe, right? I mean,
yeah.
it's one thing to keep yourself safe, but it's a whole other thing to keep a kid safe, yeah.
Well, I mean,
And you know that
we
if
didn't
you fail, that's the end of him, right? So,
and that's it, and
yeah,
that's it. But what we found well, first of all, I didn't do the same things I did when I was in my 20s hitchhiking. I didn't go to bars. I didn't like it wasn't the same sort of journey. Like we didn't go out late at night. We researched and talked to people and read up on places we were going to make sure that it felt fairly secure. But we received before we left on our journey, we received a lot of fear-based messaging from our friends and family, like, "You need to
I'm
get
sure. Yeah.
kidnap insurance," like, that whole sort of train of thought, which was kind of crazy. Like, that didn't make sense to me, and people were afraid for us because, "Look, I'm blonde, and you're a single woman," and I know that's what you were alluding to, "and you have a child with you. What if somebody's grabs you?" But what we found was each country we went to, it was filled with people and parents and children. And parents and children, we'd meet them at parks and they just wanted to. I'd sit before I spoke any Spanish. on benches next to the mothers watching their children play, and we'd look at each other and giggle and point, and that was the basis of our communication. But I never felt threatened. I felt like I was, I was surrounded by people like me. They just spoke different languages and had different skin colors and different traditions and cultures, and that's okay. How lovely, how absolutely lovely. So I didn't feel that kind of, fear. I mean, I could tell you a very funny fear story if you want to hear it.
Good, tell me.
We were, that was my dog. We were a city called Cartago. I wanted to go to the coffee region when we were in Costa Rica. And some people had said, don't go, it's scary there. It's dangerous. It could be dangerous in certain areas, just as any place could be. And I was like, okay. And this was still within the first 6 months or 7 months of our travel, or maybe it was just after. No, I think it was just after Guatemala. So it was maybe 9 months, 10 months in. So I'm still kind of in this, like, there's fear. I don't speak the language yet. My Spanish is nothing at this point. And I remember, okay, but I want to go to Cartago, and Miro was up for the journey, and I wanted to see the coffee region. And we get there somewhere in the evening, and we're looking for our hostel or hotel. I remember where we were staying at the time. And we're trying to follow this map to find the location, and it's now getting dark. And the map said go down this one street, and it was very, very narrow, and it was in between these two buildings, kind of alley-like. And I remember being kind of, on alert, really on alert, and, hyper vigilant at this point, not really kind of feeling secure for some reason, just because these people said, oh, Cartago, scary place. And I remember coming towards us at the end of the kind of alley or street. Here comes a man walking towards us. And immediately I turned to Miro and I said, Miro, give me your hand. And he goes, why? And I said, that man has big pants. And I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know why that freaked me out. I don't know what the fear was. He passed us. We started cracking up, and we just started talking about what fear is. We finally found our hotel and got to our room, and, we had this conversation. But there was like this internal exhale from me when I realized how this fear was making me like very hypervigilant, very like just thinking there's like danger at the turn of the corner. And a lot of that hypervigilance, by the way, comes from my own, growing up and my own healing and all of that stuff. Somebody who grew up in a household that, I was always yelled at every single day, like the screaming, and, that messed with my nervous system, and I remained hypervigilant for much of my early adult life. So that kind of accessing that memory, maybe it kept us safe, but it also, like, that experience of the ridiculousness of being afraid of a man's big pants and thinking that my son, give me your hand, like like this whole thing was kind of a story of
Yeah.
ridiculousness. It
Natural
did,
reactions. I mean,
yeah.
the it's there's a yes and no. I mean, yeah, obviously I've been all over the world and traveled
Mhm,
in dangerous places and this and that. But what I do know is that the dangers are real. It's a little bit like when you're walking in the bush. I mean, there are lions and an elephant out there, and they just are, and you kind of need to know. And if you don't know the area, then you kind of want a guide. And as you say, you take local advice and all of that. But nonetheless, a big leap to do something like that. And did you? The other thing, of course, is when you travel like that in developing countries, sometimes you get sick, right? Sometimes you go down with a stomach bug or something like that can knock you out for quite a few days. Did that ever happen? And then you're sort of having to tell Miro, okay, here's what you do. This is where to go buy food. This is, because you just can't move. Or were you lucky
Surprisingly,
with that? Were you just cast iron stomach and nothing like that ever happened?
surprisingly, that didn't happen to me. I do remember Miro getting struck with some bug. And I don't remember what country. I think it might have been Ecuador or Colombia. But I do remember me taking care of him and taking him to they have wonderful clinics and like doctors attached to pharmacies. And I mean, healthcare is really affordable for those sorts of things in these countries. But nothing like that ever happened to me as far as I can remember.
Yeah,
Look,
you
you want me
probably
to scan 16 years?
Yeah, I mean, in all my years of travel, it's only happened to me once or twice, but once in
Yeah,
India, but it sure
yeah,
can happen if it happens.
it
Um,
can happen. Sure.
and then, if you're responsible for a kid, I guess what I'm doing is I'm just trying to answer all the questions which would come up in the mind of anyone listening, because what you did is something I would totally do, but I
Yeah,
would also go through all of that trepidation, and I would
yeah.
expect to have to answer all of those questions
Well,
because,
we had an emergency plan. I mean, we
okay,
did. We had, he knew where our passports were. He knew our bank card. He had full access to our bank card. It was our money. He
okay,
had emergency numbers. We always knew where the consulate was in each new country, especially when he was younger, much
yeah.
younger. We did take those sorts of emergency precautions, should something happen to me, he knew what to do. There was a plan. He knew to call one of my parents and he knew to get to a consulate. He knew to, ask for police or whatever, but none of that ever happened.
So while you're on the road, I presume the first year you probably just set some money aside and you were living off those savings or whatever. Were you
Yeah.
also, but I know because I followed your story a little bit at the beginning. I know that you were also working and freelancing as you went.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me about that. Like, at what point did you realize, actually I can make a living on the road like this. I can live this way. I can economically support this. That's interesting because I think for a lot of people, it's natural to think, well, you're either at home working or you're on vacation or you're traveling. If you're traveling, you've made the money to go and travel. And then at a certain point, you'll need to go home and refill the coffers and so on. So tell me how that began to happen, where you started to realize, oh, this actually could be my livelihood.
Well, I told you this story of 8 months into the travels when Miro said, "Can we do this forever?" That's when I had to look at two very important aspects of our journey. I figured 1 year of travel, we had savings, we were fine, we were on a budget. The budget was bigger than somebody who was living nomadically because I wanted us to be able to go do things and go ziplining and do some, really fun adventure stuff. The other thing I had to look at was education, and we could talk about that afterwards if you want. But
Yeah,
I
I'd love
knew
to.
1 year of travel, that would be educational enough. I just knew that.
Yeah.
So when we decided 8 months in to actually continue it, I had to then start freelancing again. And from 8 months, it took me about 4 months to build up my clientele again. So I'd have work and I could work on the road and do, as I said, I came from advertising, marketing, branding, design, all that. They were all skills that I had. I had a computer. So the first 8 months and really until about a year, I didn't work. But 8 months to about, for the final months of the first year, I started to reach out to my contacts and, put up sites doing freelance and things like that, trying to find clients. And so, yeah, I could work on the road. I also started to blog, and part of that was crazy. We started to people started to read it. Like that's how we connected, I
Yeah.
think.
I found it and I was like, this is
Yeah.
fascinating. Started to read your blog. I can't
Yeah.
believe this woman is doing this. This is amazing. Yeah.
And my son and I were doing a podcast at the time, and his cute little voice, we would get to a country and we'd research a topic together and we'd write it together. Sometimes we do interviews with other people and this cute little voice of Miro. You heard his voice earlier. He's a man now. He's not this little kid anymore. And so people started listening to our podcast and people started following our journey, and that was crazy. And so I was doing a little bit of design work and a little bit of consulting and marketing. But frankly, I hated it. I was done. I was like so done with that. I was burnt out, and it just felt like it was so contrary to who I was becoming through this journey. And eventually I gave that up. And at one point, our blog became the source of supporting us. We were selling advertisements, we were getting sponsorships. It was like super crazy. It was like the Wild West of travel blogging back then. Again, we're talking 16 years ago, and travel blogging now it's this whole industry, but I was one of the
Yeah,
first.
without realizing it, you were being an influencer.
Yeah, I guess so. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so this begins to happen. One last logistical question. You go down there without Spanish, yet you're
Yeah.
renting houses and things like that. How are you managing to do that without speaking the language?
How did we end up doing that?
Unless you were renting from expats.
I think I remember landing in this town, this really, dirt road kind of town on the beach in Peru. And I remember we got off the bus and we're like, okay, we're going to stay here. This is where we're going to go. And we're going to stay here for either a month or a couple, because we like to immerse ourselves. And I remember we went to a cafe and we met somebody, this surfer dude who was on a bike, and he spoke English, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll help you. I'll ride around the town and I'll see who's renting and I'll come back and get you." And that was really cool. A lot of times we went to hostels, and I think from there we were able to reach out to locals. My
Right, there'd
son,
be sort of a contact network from there. Right.
yeah.
Makes sense.
But my son he was able to pick up on Spanish quite quickly. I mean,
Okay.
he's a fluent speaker now. He's a native fluent speaker. My
Yeah.
Spanish is still kind of embarrassing 16 years later. But we do own a cafe now, and I speak Spanish all the time. But, my Spanish is not great. But
Well, I'm sure you're being very modest. Okay. So the year turns into years. You move away from freelancing. You become an internet personality without ever having intended to,
yeah.
and realize that what your journey is doing is, of course, inspiring all sorts of people around
Yeah.
the world to take leaps of faith and freedom. Tell us what you do now and what was the evolution? I sort of know what you do, but I don't want to spoil that for the listeners. I want it from your mouth because it's extraordinary the work you're doing now. How did that evolve? So start with where you're at now, and then how did you get there?
Well, it's a story. Well, one of the things that I mentioned, and I said we can go back to that, was the whole education point.
Ah, yes.
So I knew intuitively that a year of travel, as I said, would be more educational than fifth grade for my son. That I knew. But as we decided to continue our travels as a responsible adult, as a parent, I needed to wrap my head around what education would look like for my child. I'm responsible for his education. Would we homeschool? Would I enroll him in some sort of online school? Would I enroll him in a local school? What would that look like? And I started to research all these different kinds of modalities of education. And I learned about something called unschooling. It really has been rebranded pretty much in the last 15 years because a lot of people don't have a strong connection with the word unschooling because it's saying
What's it rebranded as now?
self-directed learning.
Okay.
self-directed learning. So at the time, yeah, it's still a lot of people call it unschooling, but
Yeah.
I dove deep into this world and I started to research what that looked like and what the role of the parent was and how facilitation looked like and how the parent became a learner alongside the learner. And actually, we're all learners. We're all learning all the time.
Mm.
So it kind of challenged my idea of, well, wait a minute, just because I'm not school age anymore doesn't mean I can't learn,
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to learn. I want to learn. So lifelong learner next to a self-directed learner. That really lit me up in so many ways. And as soon as I discovered this philosophy, I read everything I could about it. I read, books, and I read about it from the political aspect. I read about it from the learning aspect, the autodidactic, world. Like that was this whole new world for me. And we really became conscious about our learning. And yeah, this became a learning journey. And instead of homeschooling or unschooling, we called it world schooling. And to me, that really talked about the journey that we were on. And anytime, look, I'm obnoxiously curious, obnoxiously. I ask questions about everything. I never grew out of that 2-year-old stage. Like, why? Like, I want to know everything. And with the invent of the internet, I can learn as much as I want based on my curiosity. And that was the thing that I started modeling to my son as we were traveling. I remember being at the Panama Canal and asking question after question after question to the tour guide. And remember, I was like, "Mom, we can look this stuff up. You're totally annoying him." He's like, "But let's look it up when we get back." And those are the kinds of, that transformed our journey into like this whole learning journey. And because we were working on this project together, our blog and our podcast to document our journey, it transformed into this like, and we're learning this and we're learning that. And these people are interesting and people do things like this culturally. And the history is that. And, we'd tell these stories on our podcast. And learning to us was just like as natural as living. And a lot of people started writing to me going, you know, well, how can I educate my child this way? How can I do this thing? And where can I go in this place, in this country? And with 5 people, what should we do? And suddenly I was getting these questions that I wasn't really qualified to answer because I was a single person. I wasn't in Europe. I wasn't in Asia. I wasn't with a large family. I didn't know how to answer these questions. And I said, okay, let's start this Facebook group because I'm sure we can come up with these ideas together. And there are people that are in different parts of the world that have this piece of this questions answer, and we could all share information. And that really became the beginning or the launch of the world schooling movement. So, I didn't mean to, but I started a movement through this. And, I had a Facebook group that grew to 60,000 people and, all this stuff happened. But just, it's kind of accidentally, I started a movement and accidentally, there's so many families doing this now. So, yeah, now I got sidetracked.
Well, I'm busy on my phone as you speak, looking up, okay, world schooling. What's world schooling? Just to see,
Yeah.
boom, all this stuff comes up.
But it wasn't a
Yeah.
thing before. It just
No,
wasn't a thing. So, yeah.
it's very interesting. What is world schooling? Everything you need to know. People often ask. Da, da, da. Here's,
Yeah.
yep.
But it wasn't a thing until we made it a thing. And now everybody can make it their own. That's fine.
Okay. So a couple of things. As you know, I homeschooled for many years because my son Rowan was,
Yeah.
sick in a way that the local schools in Texas, rural Texas, where I just couldn't handle. So I was sort of forced into it. I just said he didn't want to because I thought it was way too much work, but I ended up doing it. And like you, I ended up, formulating a method that
Yeah.
worked. So it's become a thing and it's called movement method and it's all over the world. It's neuroscience, basically applied neuroscience, blah, blah, blah. And then at a certain point after I'd been doing that for about a decade, Rowan decided he actually wanted to give the last 2 years of high school a try. And he did. And he went and he graduated. So it was interesting that he then went back into the system, but for sure, and he said this himself, he wouldn't have been able to do that if he hadn't been able to grow his brain effectively in the environment that he needed. And that was completely directed. I remember the first day he came back from, we even tried to find the most hippie school we possibly could, and he wasn't having it. And he took all his clothes off and rolled in the dirt. I want to be a countryside boy. And I was like, I hear you. And that's what we'll do. And then there was this point where, so then I was sort of homeschooling and using these different movements that I had realized on the horse opened up the learning receptors and opened up communication. So then I'd gone to neuroscientists and found out why. So, okay, well, great. So I could do this without a horse now, and I can use various types of play equipment and so on, and feed in information. And so this is good. And then he starts saying to me, as we like cracked it, and I'm feeding in like national curriculum stuff, and he says to me, I'm sick of learning. I don't want to learn anymore.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, and that's where I discovered unschooling. And I sort of looked at him and went, all right. Like I wasn't going to fight him over it. Like I was going to,
Right.
all right. And then I sort of went into her. I was like, I think I could do that. I think I could go right on doing what I'm doing just by stealth. And
Yeah.
that turned out to be absolutely the case. Because for him, it was about, stress and anxiety. So I know that process of falling into something. One of the criticisms, which of course people always leveled, one of the many criticisms people always leveled at us was, oh, well, if you homeschool like that out on a ranch in Texas, what about his, socialization? And I was like, what? So socialization, if I send him into that rural school though, he's going to get massively bullied. Yeah, that's negative socialization. Is that what you're saying I should do? But I hear you. So of course, the life that we were living on that ranch was very international. Once horseboy method and movement method became kind of a thing, there were all sorts of people coming all the time. So he was constantly surrounded by all sorts of interesting people, many of whom stayed for years in his life and are still in his life. However, with autism, a lot of many kids actually don't so much crave a peer group when they're younger. That seems to come later. They often kind of know they're not that safe around other kids. And so they tend to look to adults. But Miro, I don't know if you would say he was neurodiverse or what, but obviously he would be more a type of a child that would want to have some sort of a peer group and so on. If you're moving from country to country, you're speaking a foreign language and so on. How did you navigate around that? How did that evolve to work for him?
Yeah, well, that's a really pivotal part of our story, actually. As we started to continue our journey, he was now moving into his early adolescence. And because people were reading our blog and they were really fascinated with this form of education, we were invited to speak at conferences in the States. So one time we flew back from Peru and we went to our first unschooling conference, and we were presenting, both he and I, about our life and our learning. And that wasn't the amazing part, the presenting part. What the amazing part was, there were all of these free range 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 14-year-olds, and they were all running around together, and they were all being hyper creative and doing theater and music and creating games and all of this stuff. And that was really his first sort of entrance into an adolescent peer group, right? Because from 10 to 13, he was social, he was getting quote unquote, I hate the term socialization, as
I
if,
don't. Yeah.
Socialization could only happen
But he wasn't
with
craving to have a group of mates
not
himself.
then.
He was when he was 9 to 12, not so much.
Right.
Okay.
Not so much, because we were doing adventures and we were meeting interesting people, and sometimes there were kids and sometimes there weren't. And there was always, an adventure, and we learn how to surf, and we learn how to do this, and we like all these different things.
Yeah.
He wasn't really missing, because remember, he was really craving me and the
Yeah.
connection that he was needing to feel which prompted the whole trip. But at 13, things changed. And that became that became kind of like, oh, okay. So now something else is happening. Okay. And I remember flying back to Peru. We had this like really deep heart to heart. He was feeling the loss of this thing that he wanted, which was community. And we talked and we talked and we like, should we move back to the States? Do you want community? You know, these kids that are unschooling kids, these are your people. They're not the people that are in schools now. No, he didn't want to go back to school. He didn't want a traditional education. He wanted those people. He wanted the people that were free, that were doing the same sort of learning that he was doing. There was some sort of camaraderie or connection with those people, but they all didn't live in one place. They all came together for a conference. So we talked and talked, and he was having what I like to call situational depression, right?
What does that mean?
Uh, affected by the situation, there was a great depression. I don't think he ever had this diagnosis of clinical depression, but it was really, it became a part of our everyday life now. He was so sad. There were no, he didn't want to,
Right.
he had no connection to like the potato farmers in
Right.
the Peru Andes where we were living. He just didn't connect with these boys his age, right? He wanted his people, but he didn't want to be in the States. So there was this big, like,
So what was the solution? How did you solve that?
well, that became this brainstorm. I said, well, why don't we bring kids to us?
Right.
And that was the birth of our business that we launched together called Project World School.
Okay.
And that really became the reason why we created this business. And Miro was saying, nah, this is never going to work. This is your mom, you're dreaming. This isn't going to work. It took about a year, actually, and we got our first group to come. Now, the
And you
preparation
to Peru. They came
come
to
to
Peru.
Peru, we
Okay.
sold a teen retreat. So the
Okay.
preparation that I needed to do, and this will launch you into answering the question that I never answered, which is what I'm doing now.
Right.
But this launched me into, okay, we're bringing teens here. I need to know everything about facilitating teens. I need to know about the teen brain. I needed to know about neurobiology. I needed to know about how to hold space. I needed to know about learning communities. I needed to know about conflict resolution. I needed to know about like the travel logistics. I am creating a company out of need, but I need to be aware of these things. And that sent me into this deep dive of self-directed learning. I'm an autodidactic and always have been my whole life. So I learned everything I could about this. And there was a, sort of side story that we can talk about later, but there was a convergence of information that I was learning about the teen brain and about psychology and neurobiology and hormone development and all this stuff that really kind of sparked some of the sort of inner unsettledness inside of me about my adolescence and the abuse that I felt growing up and the way that my brain was programmed. And I started to realize that this hyper independence was a trauma response inside of me. And, all of the tools that I thought were my superpowers really came from my childhood programming, which was rooted in abuse. And as I started to work with teens, it it really helped me to start self-healing. So like there were all these things going on at the same time. My son moving into his own adolescence, me revisiting my adolescence, and then, learning the information, the academic information, to help guide me and create those sort of foundations to be able to hold space for other teens. It was powerful. Like that really was what drove me into the work that I'm doing now.
As you know, if you followed any of my work, I'm an autism dad, and we have a whole career before this podcast in helping people with neurodivergence, either who are professionals in the field. Are you a therapist? Are you a caregiver? Are you a parent? Or are you somebody with neurodivergence? When my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism in 2004, I really didn't know what to do. So I reached out for mentorship, and I found it through an amazing adult autistic woman who's very famous, Dr. Temple Grandin. And she told me what to do. And it's been working so amazingly for the last 20 years that not only is my son basically independent, but we've helped countless thousands of others reach the same goal, working in schools, working at home, working in therapy settings. If you would like to learn this cutting edge neuroscience-backed approach, it's called Movement Method. You can learn it online. You can learn it very, very simply. It's almost laughably simple. The important thing is to begin. Let yourself be mentored as I was by Dr. Grandin and see what results can follow. Go to this website, newtrailslearning.com. Sign up as a gold member. Take the online Movement Method course. It's in 40 countries. Let us know how it goes for you. We really want to know. We really want to help people like me, people like you out there live their best life, to live free, ride free, see what happens.
So,
And go
okay,
ahead.
just before we go into the work
That's
you
a
do,
lot, right?
I want to know how those conferences or those retreats then ended up being structured. Also,
Yeah.
how did you, there's some logistics there, like insurance, and you're suddenly responsible for all these kids,
Yeah.
right? In Peru. Whoa, that's a tall order. And are they still going? And what did you do? What was the format?
Yeah. So Project World School is still operating. We are still running retreats, believe it or not. The first retreat was a smaller retreat, and we did a lot of learning. It was a little too long. We did a 6-week retreat for 4 teens. The logistics, luckily, I have a lawyer in my family that helped me
Okay.
create,
Yeah,
uh,
because there's a lot of moving parts to something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And guess what? I'm an amazing producer, so I can do multiple things at once. I now produce conferences as well. So I've produced 10 conferences, and I love lots of moving parts and putting things together to create this big vision. And I've got a mind that will allow me to do that. But yeah, so the structure really was based on adventures, based on, first of all, there has to be consent, right?
Yeah.
So each teen really needed to consent to the things that we were doing each and every day. And consent is huge because I think sovereignty in human beings, bodily autonomy and sovereignty, and all of those things are a big part of my personal philosophy, and I really want to make sure that that's a part of every event that I've ever hosted and will host in the future. So the consent of here's the guidelines that we must live by in order for you to be a part of this retreat. Do you consent to these guidelines? The guidelines are things like no drugs. We need to be within the community structure, no leaving the community, no drinking, you know, no, honoring each other's bodily sovereignty, autonomy, respect for things, that sort of thing. So there's this consent going in. It's not rules. Rules are very different than opting into something, and that creates an agreement, right? So so approaching it from that perspective from the get-go means that we have to have a sense of community and communication. There has to be, each teen has to have the ability to be able to either self-advocate for themselves within the group or with me, the facilitator, so I can advocate for them. But there has to be a level of emotional intelligence.
You have
And
other facilitators as well. I presume you'd have, because if you went down
most,
blue in the middle of
yes,
it, was that
always
okay?
two adults. And most of the retreats always, have been like, we haven't had any problems. There's been a few because people, change their minds and things happen and we have to negotiate that. But going in, that really is the spirit of our team retreats. It's you're autonomous, your words, your point of view matters. And we created this structure of a nightly circle. So every night we'd review the day, what worked, what didn't work. We'd ask questions based on like a worldview perspective, but it was always a way of using the internal worlds as a way of expressing the external world, whatever was happening. So the external world became a reflection of our internal worlds, as well. So
Okay.
the internal worlds were a big part of our journeys in the Project World School structure. Yeah, go ahead.
What goes on a retreat though? What's like? Give me an idea of a typical day.
Sure. So I'll give you an example of a Peru retreat. Today we're going to explore, these set of ruins, and we're going to speak with a historian who talks about alternative history. And now we're going to do a comparison between the academic history of this ruin, and we're going to look and observe what we see, and then listen to the story of the alternative researcher. Where do we think, the truth lies? Using that kind of critical exploration. And, if we were in Peru, we're going to explore the story of the Incas. We're going to also go to what is that? The planetarium, the outdoor planetarium, and learn about the myth of the creatures that lived in the stars and how that informed the traditions that we saw in the ruins. We're going to explore it from all these different perspectives. We're going to go to the
So
farm
you'd bring
now.
in local historians, or you'd go to them.
Yeah, all locals, but we also and then, but it wasn't just about listening to a historian. Everything was experiential learning. There were no tests. There were no, you know, it was a lot of putting the pieces together through all of the experiences to learn about this culture. And then we'd look at the modern day culture and have some really big examination of that. Or we'd go stay on a farm and learn how to cook the traditional foods and actually do it and wear the traditional clothes and milk a cow or, eat a guinea pig or whatever the thing was of that particular country. And it was about cultural immersion. So it's experiential learning through cultural immersion and a lot of feedback and a lot of internal processing.
And the kids who came or still come on these are all from world school / unschooling backgrounds, or are they now from every background? Are these also high schoolers who just want to experience something different?
I'd say 95% of our clients are some sort of alternatively educated. We've had kids from like Sudbury schools or democratic schools. On occasions, we've had kids from traditional schools. Believe it or not, those are the percentage of times that we've had problems.
Well,
It's
no doubt. Yeah. Because if people are used to being organized and told what to do,
excellent.
it's very tricky if they find themselves in a vacuum. With that,
And they have freedom for the first time, and it's about who do you push boundaries against? Well, quote unquote, the perceived authority. And we're not authority, we're in partnership. Again, that partnership that my son and I set out on continued through our business, right? So that's how we function in
of
that.
course, most kids are not taught any kind of partnership.
Right. They're like, wait, this does not compute, does not make sense.
Right.
I have
That's a skill set
rule.
that, yeah,
Yeah.
most intelligence and evolution that you're not going to
Yeah,
get that at a regular school.
exactly.
But here's another question then, devil's advocate. Okay, so someone like Miro comes at the end of that education, as you say, he's 26 now. Can those kids then go on to university if they want to? And if so, how? Like, would they then just go back and take a GED and sit whatever exams they want what they're told that they need to sit in order to go and get the university entrance that they need? Or what's the mechanism by which someone from the world school background would then enter sort of mainstream higher education?
Well, we haven't moved into what I do now,
All right.
but
Is that the
part
okay.
it can be part of the work that I do. I work with teens now directly with tools for mental health, but I tend to work with a lot of teens that obviously come from the unschooling, world schooling, homeschooling world. And part of what I do is help them to organize their experience into a transcript. Transcripts can be created from anybody. It could be created from a parent. It could be created from an outside source, but I work from the perspective of mental health and also educational background, right?
But
So,
what's a transcript exactly?
well, in the United States, and to answer your question from the perspective of the United States, and it may be different in different countries in Europe and South America and the rest of the world. Transcripts are from your school, your high school experience, and it records what you studied and what your grade is. And really, that's all it is. As an unschooler and an unschooling coach, one of the things that I help students do is really translate their experience into a transcriptable language that a college will accept. There's in the United States, there's private schools, there's also state schools in every state, and each one has a different format of what they're looking for. And in addition to just a line item, I help unschoolers, teens, create portfolios that show their work, that are not just, art-based portfolio. When we say portfolio, we think of an artist showing a portfolio. This is a scope, and breadth of work that they've created, and it may not be a physical thing. It may be a description of the experience and an outline of the learning that took place, and it may be a journey into volunteering at an animal sanctuary for several months, and we could pull that into biology, civics, civics and service and humanities and all these other areas that become a relevant part of their experience. And I'll tell you, I there's an there's an unschooling mother of 5 who was the dean at a private school in Dubai, who got all of her kids into whatever university they wanted because she was able to distill their information into, this very unique educational package that they were able to present to the college of their choice. And she taught me many things as I do this for my clients. Colleges, especially in the United States, universities in the United States, which is where the majority of my clients come from, are looking for those unique applications that stand out. They'll take the top 1% of those or 2% of those versus the same transcript with the same GPA and the same grades that they see over and over and over and over.
But don't they also require by law a sort of GPA thing or not? Grade point average thing? Do they not
Not
require, like
necessarily.
or that
uh,
you've taken, your SATs, or in England it would be your GCSEs and your A levels or whatever. Are these now actually not necessary to get into college, or you have to find a way of doing an equivalent?
Well, you say by law, and you're making it seem as if there is a legal precedence dictating who gets into college and who doesn't. Colleges determine via their own system, whether it's a Cal State college, you know, and that system itself will have its own set of regulations, or the private universities will take whatever, they're private, they'll take whatever they want.
Right.
So there's no law. I'm not so certain about the UK and if they accept these types of students. I don't know. Again,
I think I need to research it. Yeah, because
yeah,
and sort of I'm interviewing you from Germany.
right. And
You know,
Germany's very different
yeah.
also. There's a stricter,
Well, there also
you know,
is no homeschooling in Germany.
no, there isn't. There
It-
isn't.
it- So, for example,
Along with,
if I were
go ahead.
to take my kids out of the country and homeschool them and want them to get into a German university, they'd have to go and take some exams at some point.
Sure.
But one of the things I found with Rowan, with my son there, was I remember at this one point I was driving him in to sit a 3-hour math exam. And you got to understand, this is a kid who was nonverbal, you know, incontinent, massive tantrums, harming himself, and then there I am, 10 years later, driving him in to sit this 3-hour math exam. And I said to him, "Are you really gonna do that?" And he went, "Yeah, I'm totally going to do that." But he said, "But like I said before, if I hadn't done all those years of movement method, I wouldn't have been able to get that."
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I guess my question is that if I'm trying to anticipate what a listener might need to know if they're listening to go, "Oh, I quite like to do that," but maybe I'm not American, or maybe I are what are the various systems now? Okay, you're working mostly with kids from the USA. Do you also
Uh,
work fairly directly with colleges? And do you
No,
reach out to colleges and say, "Hey, I do this, what are your parameters, blah, 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 blah." Or is it really you just help the teen and then they go from there?
I just help the teen. Yeah, I'm hands-on with the teen. Um, so my clients that I've worked with for the educational piece,
Mm,
that's only like maybe 10% of the work I do. The
okay.
majority of the work I do is in the field of mental health.
Which we'll get
But
into in a second. Yeah.
yeah, but
I just
that
want to exhaust
piece,
this mind
yeah,
that I'm,
that piece is primarily for students in the US. And I, again, I just don't know. I just don't know the requirements for colleges in other countries. But there are advocates that I'm networked with that are doing this work around the world, but I just can't speak to it.
right. I'd be really interested to find out, because I think it's something which a lot of parents would really love to look at and maybe assume that they can't. So I think I might go off and do a little bit of research,
Okay.
and see what I come up with too. All right, so let's go into now to the mental health side of what you do. How and why did you end up in mental health? Because obviously, what you did was very good for mental health. You didn't necessarily have a particular mental health crisis with you and Miro, almost rather the opposite. You learned how to create good mental health. So,
Yeah.
talk us how you ended up helping people who are maybe not quite so fortunate.
Well, again, coming from a background where there was a lot of programming that I really wanted to reprogram, right?
Right.
I really didn't like the belief that I had that something was wrong with me, that I was bad, that I was too
You
much
have
for.
that belief?
Oh, I had those beliefs. Oh, yeah. When
Okay, well
somebody
then
went,
scale back. Let's hear about you then. We need to know a bit about your childhood.
okay.
Tell us the
Well,
story.
basically, I grew up in a household where, my mother was very controlling and she yelled at me all the time. And I know kids were yelled at, you know, uh, it was just normal. It was just a
Yeah.
normal part of growing up. But it also has an effect on a person's internal worlds. It really does. We create beliefs about ourselves based on the upbringing that we have. And like I said, the hypervigilance was a result of, always being frightened, right? So I was frightened a lot. I still have episodes where if I hear people screaming, my nervous system is dysregulated and I find my body physically crying. I may not be like, oh, I'm going to start crying, but those are the sorts of nervous system responses that my body is programmed to do, and that comes along with belief systems. And I noticed in my early 20s a lot of history of, being in relationships with the wrong people who
What
didn't
did you
treat me
think was
right.
wrong with you? Would you say by the time you hit, say, being Miro pregnancy or early parent years, if someone had sat you down on the psychiatrist's couch and said, "What's wrong with you?" What would have been like the three things you'd have said?
Well, it would actually be before that because I was already into my path of healing before Miro was born. I was 32 when he was born, but my 20s is when I really started this path. And I believed I was a bad person, always trying to do good. I believed that I was faulty. I believed I was too much for people. And then a lot of time I believed I was not enough. It was just like this really deep mental, you know, I don't know if you swear on your podcast. Do you swear?
Swear away, my love.
It was this deep mental fuckery
Yeah.
constantly spinning in my head
Yeah.
where the messages, my internal voice was really mean. She was a bitch. She was
You
horrible.
bitch. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't do this. You're not good enough. You're not this. You're not that. You're not capable of doing this. And hearing those things and not knowing what to do with those messages, really, again, my hyper independence, again, trauma response, it kept me very, on my path. When something, had a red flag, which really the red flag was me, I'd leave. My relationships, I was always the one to leave. Or I'd pull them close and I'd push them away. I'd pull them close, I'd push them away. And right before they're ready to leave me, I'd leave. So like this relationship dynamic that I was having in my 20s was not working. And the fuckery in my head was not really conducive of being a healthy person, and I wanted to change that. I wanted that. I wanted to reprogram that. I wanted it to be something else. And so I dove deep, in those years into self-healing and psychology, and I learned quite a bit about how to heal some of, I had attachment wounds and how to create a healthy attachments and all of that stuff. So I had some background in using tools. But when I became and I did this because I wanted to be a parent. I wanted to be a parent who didn't parent the way I was parented. I did this because it was really important to me to have these things healed. And when I finally became a parent at 32, like I was aware of my internal dialogue. I was aware of the voice and I was able to turn the volume down. I used tools to turn that volume down. I
What
used
tools did you use? Tell us about those tools.
well, just by like one very, very simple tool is by putting your attention towards that voice and saying to that voice instead of antagonizing it, I hear you. And there must be a wonderful message that you're trying to give to me to keep me safe. But I'm going to use this knob and I'm going to turn the volume down. So instead of antagonizing the voice in my head, taming it. And then through shadow work, I was able to determine where those messages were coming from.
Tell us what shadow work is.
Shadow work is dealing with the parts of yourself that you've disowned, the parts of yourself that were programmed and put into the shadow that are usually shrouded in shame. A lot of shame is given to you, right? The you're not good enough and I'm not good enough, I'm too much for people. That came from my my psychological development at the time I was hearing the messages transformed into messages that made sense to me. So as a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, If I'm told to shut up, the only thing that makes sense to me as a message is I'm not worthy of being heard, right? I can't rationalize beyond my emotional or psychological development because I am 5 years old, right? So the message that gave me was I'm not good enough to be heard or I'm too much. And I take those identity pieces and I put them into the shadows, the parts of myself, and I disown them and I don't look at them. Yet the voice of those shadows come up, as part of my subconscious voice. And that's what I was hearing. So I needed to go deeper and not just quiet the voice. I needed to learn where those messages came from and heal some of those wounds that were part of my childhood programming. And that became a big journey that I embarked on. And still, look, nobody's done. You're never done with your own internal
And
work.
that's effectively Jungian psychoanalysis.
Yeah,
more.
that particular is. Yeah, shadow work is all Jungian. Yeah,
Right.
very
So those,
so. But I also used other tools, like the turning the voice down.
love that
And
one, turning the voice
I
down.
I used Byron Katie's The Work, which I think is so powerful, which is just a way of separating the thought, which becomes a belief. If you think a thought enough times, that actually becomes a
Yeah, the
belief.
repetition will make a belief. Absolutely.
And when you use Byron Katie's work, you're separating the thought from the belief and you're giving it space to question it and create new possible ways of thinking. So it creates new neural pathways around that particular belief and it helps to loosen the strength or the power of that limiting belief. So
People might know who Jung was, Carl Jung, but people might not know who Byron Katie was or is.
she's somebody who's written self-help books and she created this tool called, quote unquote, The Work. You look Byron Katie up on the internet, you'll find The Work. It's 4 simple questions and then you turn it around. So let's say I had the belief I'm not good enough. You find ways to turn it around and you start speaking the words like, I am good enough. Okay, well, that's pretty simple. That's a simple turnaround. Or how about nobody's good enough? Or, good enough is not good enough. Or good enough actually means being better. Or, finding ways to create new neural pathways around the same thought, whether it's true or not, doesn't matter. You're creating new neural pathways by speaking an alternate way of that particular thought.
I'm just looking this up as you
It's,
speak, and I've got
I
yes,
love her stuff. And it's
I've got
free.
the 4 questions. It's,
4
it's,
questions and a turnaround.
the,
Is
the,
it
the
true?
thought is
Yeah.
not fact. Is it what? One, is it true?
Are you
2,
sure it's true?
is it absolutely true?
Right.
Is it 100% true? 3,
Right.
how does this thought make me feel?
Right.
And
And the
4,
feeling before you get to the last one, the feeling is where the charge is. And when you have the combination of a repetition in thought, which is a belief, and a charged emotion, there's power in that. And sometimes it takes over your rationality. And then the last question, go ahead.
what would things be like if I didn't hold this belief?
Wow. And then you turn it around. So like all these things
Yeah.
together, it's so incredibly powerful. That's another tool that I use. Obviously, I didn't create it, but it's one of those tools that is mind-blowing and mind-changing. It can change you don't have to do a whole ton of research. You just need to do this one tool, and that alone is enough. But
Interesting.
Rupert,
Okay,
tools,
so go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
I
you
was
go.
saying, tools to me are one of the most magical gifts, right? Using a tool.
100%.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, this begs another question, which is you did all this work on yourself. You became a parent, and then you use these tools to help you as a parent as well as yourself. And now you want to. There was another parent involved. When you went with Miro, did you have to justify that to his dad and ask for permission to take him out of the country and so on and so forth? And how did you navigate that? Because that also must have been somewhat tricky.
Well, believe it or not, Miro's father and I, be- we were best friends. After we divorced, we became
Okay.
co-parents and we had a really wonderful relationship. He had been battling many, many physical ailments. He had things from like cancer, and he had so many struggles from his physical well-being that he was always facing. And when we were married, he had these things. And when we split before Miro was born. And part of that was, I was Miro's father's primary caretaker, and he had healed and gotten better, but I didn't want to be a parent and resent him and still be in the mode of parenting him. And we split, and it was amicable, and we remained best friends, co-parents. And when I had this idea to leave, he had moved to another state. When I had this idea to leave, he's like, "Yeah, go for it. This is what a great opportunity. You can do it. I'm sick. I can't do this. I have to be here. Go do it."
But thank God he wasn't somebody who was, controlling, like, no way are you taking my
Oh,
son, down to that dangerous place full of, you know,
no, no, he was bless his heart. He was so supportive and really saw the benefits that Miro was getting. And he was a little trepidatious when we wanted to, continue the journey. And he flew down to Guatemala and stayed with us and saw our life and really felt better, but did go back. He was living in Arizona at the time. And just a few years later, he did pass away. So,
Hey.
you know, it's a sad story. We were actually on a teen retreat with a group of teens in Peru when he passed away, and it was
yeah.
emotional and sad, and it was, yeah, what an experience. And every time we go back to Peru and we go back to that same place, Miro had a visitation from his father there, which was really amazing. But that was, gosh, 8, 9 years ago now.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the complexity and healing and caregiving and all of this, tied up in this story, you managed to create a son who's mentally pretty cool because he's
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
grown up in this optimal way. So, at what point do you fall into looking after the mental health of teens and tweens who are not doing so well? How does that manifest? Because I would imagine that a lot of them who are coming out of the world schooling environment are fairly happy. I should
Yes.
imagine that they're not being bullied at high school. They're not subject to those kinds of peer pressures. So yeah, talk to us about
Sure.
that mental health job.
Well, I did all those tools that I discovered in my 20s were a part of my sort of toolbox when I was facilitating teens at the Project World School retreats. So
Right.
I knew that because I'd used them, I used them on myself, and I knew that tools were a powerful way to work through anxiety, being homesick, being outside of your comfort zone for a period of time and in an environment that was really, challenging and new, right? A lot of the teens that I worked with on the trips had never been outside of their home country. They weren't always world schoolers. Some of them were homeschoolers that left for the first time for our trips. And so using these tools was really like, I felt like I could facilitate anything because I had tools on my side. It wasn't me, psychologist, because I'm not a psychologist. It was me facilitating tools in partnership And I've used the tools and I've overcome many of these challenges in my own journey. And like I said, working with adolescents, working with teens helped me to sort of heal my inner teen every single time. Like it was just so fulfilling to the teen that lived inside of me that was never seen or heard or really understood. And when 2020 hit, boy, there, you know, isolating teens that this is an age group that really needed social connection. The isolation really affected not only the world schoolers, but the homeschoolers and all the other teens that were
Sure.
in a sort of orbit that I worked in. And I said, okay, we're not traveling. Let's meet online. And the meeting, I started these free online sort of meetups, and I would meet with them 2 hours every week, and we play games. The first hour, we talk philosophy or internal worlds. I call it philosophy because it sort of takes it outside of the the attention of them. It's something they can talk about and be heard, but it usually always went back into, what's going on inside of them and what they say really matters. And then the second hour, we'd play a game of some sort. So it was this joyful connection that they look forward to every week. And from that, teens were messaging me because I had, 40, 50 teens joining every week, and I'd facilitate this big online thing. And they'd message me privately, Lainie, what can I do about this? I'm feeling this because I'm not their parent. I am a parent, but I'm not their parent. And I'm somebody that their parents trusted. And it became like, oh, here's this other adult that will give me this outside, perspective. And so I, in essence, became a mentor to them.
Mm.
And then I started thinking, well, wait a minute, why don't I put together some courses to empower them using these tools? And I'll find more tools and get them this massive toolkit that they can empower themselves, and they can have another partner, me and other teens, and we could do this in community. And I started to put together this toolkit, and I started producing courses. So I got certified as a, life coach, a confidence coach. And then I opened up transformative mentoring for teens and started teaching them these tools. So it was needed in a time of, the world was shut down. And in 2021, I actually wrote a book about parenting kids in partnership, parenting teens in partnership. And I included
The
many.
title of the book?
The book is called Seen, Heard, and Understood: Parenting and Partnering with Teens for Greater Mental Health. And many of the tools that I have been talking about or that I teach in my courses are in that book to empower parents to facilitate these tools with their teens and to understand the psychological and neurobiological development of teens while they're parenting if they have no background. And it's written from my perspective, but an academic perspective from a non-academic. I don't have a degree in any of this stuff. I'm a self-directed learner, but it's also from the perspective of a parent who really wanted to support their teen and all the other teens that I've been working with so that people reading the book can support their community and their families in the same way.
What's the most important thing that parents of teens need to understand on the neurobiology? Everyone knows about hormones, but
Sure, yeah, and I
but
write about hormones too.
but beyond that, there are hormones. What? Yeah. What do people not know that if they knew, it would be easier and better?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, the hormonal, the receptors in the brain that recept not adrenaline, endorphins
Mm-hmm.
are they're they have the most receptors than any other time in a human's life. And so the high of endorphins are something that's really, really important to teens. And then the neurobiological side, the part that is really in the forefront that regulates emotions is also hyper developed, where the other parts of the brain are not. So
So the
reasoning,
amygdala is
yeah,
is like your nose gets a bit big before the rest of your face
it
catches up.
does.
Yeah,
It
your
does. It does. I
amygdala
mean,
big before the rest of your brain catches up. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And the reason, so you've got
Same thing happens when you're a toddler, by the way.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so you've got these things happening at the same time. And so teens don't have the ability to project as well consequences.
Mm,
And the thrill of receiving an endorphin rush or an emotional high about something.
mm,
And all of these things are happening from a neurobiological perspective while they're starting to psychologically individuate. That means their friend groups are a bigger influence on them. And if you can imagine not being able to perceive consequences of their actions or for forecast what could happen as a result, which is, of course, a consequence, but like what the forecast could be and how that could ripple into their lives. If they don't have that biological ability, then we need to help supplement and support them by helping them reflect in a way that's not authoritarian, but in partnership of exactly where they are. We know that they're individuating. We know how important their friend groups are. We know about peer pressures. We know about all of these, drugs and sex and all of the other,
producers, yeah, basically, yeah.
all of these things are an important part of a teen's life. Well, let's
Mm.
support them as we navigate these journeys. Yeah, knowing those biological, not deficiencies. They're also superpowers in many ways. They
Well, they're also
are.
a bit of a biological imperative, right? I mean, it's the risk is necessary, because you have to go test yourself and say,
Absolutely.
can you go with your spear into the bush and come back with a wildebeest and dodge the lions? And you are going to have to get ready to reproduce the species, and all of these things are ramping up. They're all there for a reason, of course. But of course,
We are,
modern life
we,
can get away. But yeah, when parents find themselves in conflict with this,
yeah.
what can they do to not be in conflict with it?
Well, what I was going to say is we also have the pressures of cultural fears, and especially coming from 2020 and all of the changes the planet is in right now. There are these cultural memes of fears around how people need to be, and fear, people control out of fear. And if you control, we're not going to our teens are not going to be able to take healthy risks.
Yeah,
So it's going up against what can parents do? First, they have to be aware of all that's going around, all that's happening in their teens' development. They have to have an understanding of it. If they don't, they alienate the teen and say, "You're irrational, don't slam the door when you walk in the room," and there's no connection. My book is all about connection.
mm,
Connection is the only way to support a teen through all of these changes, right? And also being aware of the societal messaging and fears that are a part of our reality. We can't escape them. We can't escape them. How do we process those things in a healthy way? How do we process them in a way that's in alignment with our own values? We don't want to be controlled. We want to make decisions and take healthy risks. And part of the societal messaging right now is also preventing those healthy risks and
I agree.
making our species evolve, right? We need each generation to evolve.
If you made it this far into the podcast, then I'm guessing you're somebody that, like me, loves to read books about not just how people have achieved self-actualization, but particularly about the relationship with nature, spirituality, life, the universe, and everything. And I'd like to draw your attention to my books. If you would like to read the story of how we even arrived here, perhaps you'd like to check out the two New York Times bestsellers, The Horseboy and The Long Ride Home, and come on an adventure with us and see what engendered, what started Live Free, Ride Free. And before we go back to the podcast, also check out The Healing Land, which tells the story of my years spent in the Kalahari with the Sun, Bushmen, hunter-gatherer people there, and all that they taught me and mentored me in, and all that I learned. Come on that adventure with me.
Where in your view does nature come into this?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Where in your view does nature come into this?
I mean, we're talking about biological development. That is nature.
Indeed, but people are not living, for the most part, in the environment that their biology is.
I thought you meant nature versus nurture. Okay. Nature. Oh, such a huge part of this. Yeah. It's an untouched, what's the word I'm looking for? System that can teach us to, if we can adapt to become more in alignment with nature, with animals, with the system of birth, death, growth, all of the ecology of nature, that if we can once again be mirroring those systems versus some of the artificial systems that our teens have been thrust in front of, like we're talking about the computer, where it's a tool. Tools are great. Video games are great. I'm not an anti-video game person, but if that is a person's only world, that becomes their entire biosphere, right?
Yeah.
We need to be able to balance nature, who is the biggest gift and the biggest teacher to all of this. But it's not just team go out in nature, it's family. What can we do as a family, as a unit, as a culture, as even society, to be able to integrate nature as part of our soul, our being, our very essence, our presence.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I feel that one's best shot as a family really is to do stuff in nature together that does involve some risk, because nature always inevitably does, but where you learn to navigate those, because that's what our biology wants. I do know, though, that the vast majority of people are not living that way, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. If people are not able to go swim with dolphins, dodge elephants, and train horses as part of their family culture, what's your formula for using nature like this with teens and tweens in a way that is more accessible to people who don't have a family culture of this?
Well, I mean, that is one of the reasons why we created Project World School. A lot of it is in nature. A lot of that is the cultural connection to nature, human connection to the environment. But this answer is going to be a little sort of outside of what you think I'm going to answer. So, get to nature, make plans, do it. Go have an adventure. Adventures are so important. But the other thing is, if you are stuck in a rural city and you really can't access nature, you're not going to believe this answer. Play board games together.
Okay, go on.
Because the playfulness, if we can access our playfulness as a family, And you can even find board games that are based on nature. And if you want to go down that path, that's fine. But what I'm saying is cultivate a culture within your family where playfulness is one of the foundations, because through playfulness, you can access imagination, you can access creativity, and you can access problem solving. And all of those things can be, part of a really extraordinary experience. And let me tell you, if you're a family that plays board games together, when you get out into nature, it becomes this adventure-like experience, right? You have the training. If you're stuck in a rural area, you have the training to take risks, to push your luck, to, make a strategic choice. I love board games, for
Were you
that
always
very
into board games? Or was that a later in life thing?
always, always. And in fact, part of the family culture of Miro and I, we traveled with a game bag. Like they were such an important part of our family culture that, yeah, it's always been a big part of it.
What's your game of choice?
Right now,
But
I mean,
now
it
and
changes.
over time, and or do you have games of choice for particular psychological seasons?
I probably do. I'm really immersed in the board game culture right now because we own a board game cafe.
I
Believe
was
it or
going to
not, my
ask you
son
about
and I.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, my son
Brave.
and I love it. So 6 months ago, we opened one here in Guanajuato, Mexico, and it's the only board game cafe in the central part of the city and state. And it's wonderful. So I'm diving into all these new board games and different types of strategy. And my son is making games, which is so amazing too. But what is my favorite? I mean, there's so many. I love social deduction games like Werewolf and Secret Hitler and things like that. I know. What a
No idea
funny.
what these are, but yeah, yeah. Okay, I'll go find out.
There's
Secret Hitler.
social Secret Hitler is a lot of
What's
fun.
a secret
And
Hitler?
it's funny, and you're in Germany right now. It's
Should I
it's
be looking under the bed?
I know. It's you everybody creates a role. You're either a liberal or a fascist, and you have to
Okay.
pass, the game is you go through the order and there's a president and a chancellor and you have to vote, and if the chancellor is the secret role of Hitler, then of course the game is over and you have all these discussions and you pass these different,
Interesting.
it's a lot of fun, but Werewolf is kinda like Mafia, and you can play with big groups of people, and I play these with teens a lot, and those are wonderful games, but I also love strategy games. I love there is a nature game that I love, it's called Cascadia, and it's one of my favorite board games now, Cascadia, but I
Yeah,
like
Cascadia. What does that tell us about that one?
It's it's a sort of like an abstract puzzle game that you're playing your own board. You're building environments that connect different animals, attract different animals on it. And you've got water areas and you've got mountains and savannas and
Sort of
you put
ecological management type thing.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. And you put different animals on them. So there's hawks and salmon and in the water and eat bears and foxes and stuff. So yeah, it's a puzzle game, but it is ecological management. So I love that
Really
game.
interesting what you say about game playing because I'm a great believer in tracking, having
Yes,
spent a lot of time growing up hunting and then
yes,
having lived with hunting gathering tribes, and that's always been a big part of my life. And the idea of tracking, you don't have to be hunting in order to track. Tracking
right,
informs hunting, but tracking in and of itself is an amazing thing. But really, I think as a human, we are always tracking because we're a hunter-gatherer species. So we're also tracking plants. We're also tracking the weather. We're also tracking ideas. We're also tracking the spirit world. We're also tracking emotions. We're not just tracking that animal track right there, but that animal track right there is where it begins. And I feel that games actually are an extension of that. I always have felt that they're an extension of that. And they're to some degree an altered state of consciousness because you role play, you go into it, and then you build your empathy, which is
Yeah.
exactly what you have to do with hunting and gathering. You have to become kudu, or you have to become ayahuasca or whatever to know how to handle it. I was in Austin, Texas about a year ago, and I wandered into this cafe, and there were all these people playing board games.
Love it.
And I looked around, and you could order a pizza and you could have a beer. And I was like, this is genius. And I had it in
Yeah.
the back of my mind, and I could just see the community and I could feel the happiness. You talked about endorphins and dopamine, but you're also getting oxytocin with that because it's, and serotonin because it's social. And you could like eat the good hormones as you walked into that place. It was like, wow. And like, I looked around because I'm always on, psychological safari because I'm an autism dad. And I'm like, oh yeah, like a good 60% of the people in here are on the spectrum, and it's community. I've seen this in other places, like in the Ren Fair community and the LARPing community, the live action role play community, and things like this, which are really the same thing. But the idea of sitting together in this way. And so it's really interesting to me that before we hit record, you're saying, oh yeah, my latest thing, we've got a board game cafe. And of course, Lainie has a board game. Of course, she does that curve. Yeah. Of course, she'll then have like a chain of them, through the world, by the time we do our next podcast, probably. What gave
Wow.
you,
Okay.
well, it's inevitable with you, I think. What gave you the idea to open a board game cafe? It's a great idea.
Well, because every time we get to a new country or a new city, my son and I would always like look up, is there a board game cafe here? And we've
When
been
did
to
you
board
become
game.
aware of board game cafes? How long have they been a thing?
Oh, they've been around for ages. Our favorite was in Thailand, in Chiang Mai. And we're 10 years ago, we found this wonderful board game cafe. And before we opened up our own board game cafe, I reached out to the owner who became a friend of ours. And we had these wonderful conversations about what to do and how to do it. But yeah, it was just our thing. We love board games. So we would always just look up. We've been to 40 something countries. We've been around the world. We didn't just stay in Latin America. So we've been in Southeast Asia, through Europe, into Africa as well. So, the last 16 years has taken us many, many places. And well, board game cafes was like, okay, Japan, board game cafe. Wherever we went, it didn't matter.
And when you go to them and it's just the two of you, would you then automatically fall in with other people to play with?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes because there are
Because
limitations.
some of them require quite a lot of people to play, right?
Exactly. One of my son's favorite game is Cosmic Encounters, and we play that all around the world. And you need at least 4 people to play that game. Yeah.
Okay. So when you walk into a board game cafe in Casablanca, and you don't know anyone, and the guy says, of all the board game cafes in all the towns in all the world, you had to walk into this one. I had to get that in there. How do you then break the ice with the locals, and particularly if there's a language barrier, to then start playing?
I mean, it's different every time. Sometimes there's a table with people, or you ask the board game cafe, the person behind the desk or the waitress or whatever, the game master, you ask them. You just,
Yeah.
everyone is different. It's just in our board game cafe, we have a singles night. And we also run different board games. So, like people want to play Catan and there's only one person. We've got, come it's Catan night and we'll put you together with a group of people. And then we also, in our board game cafe, we do language exchange. So intercambio. So we play, Pictionary and all these different games in both English and Spanish. So people learning English can practice and people learning Spanish can practice with native speakers. And so, yeah,
Brilliant.
it's a lot of fun.
And who makes the coffee? Who serves the drinks? Who makes the food? Is that all you and Miro? Just the two of you?
Well, we do have 2 employees,
Right.
but yeah, I actually cook for the entire cafe. We have American food. Yeah. So Yeah, I cook mac and cheese, chili con
How do you
carne.
have the time to sit here and talk to me? And why are you not down at the cafe?
Because
Man,
we have employees to
okay.
do that. So
But it must be also quite a lot of work. What do you think is the correlation between board games and mental health?
again, what I said about the family culture of being able to play together, the accessing the playfulness, and I'd say adults that lose their instinct to play,
Mm.
those are those that get sick. So, from a parent's perspective and an adult's perspective, it's important to continue to cultivate your ability to be
Explore.
playful.
No,
From
I so
from
agree. I so agree. What is it? They
and
say
the
you don't stop playing because you get old. You get old because you stop playing.
Exactly. And from the child's perspective, it's another point of connection. And then, like I said, all of the things like imagination, access to your imagination, access to risk taking, problem solving, creativity, all that is tied into the gameplay.
I'm sold. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go start board game cafe. Baden.
I
Yeah.
think there's one there
Yeah,
in
probably. I'm
Germany.
gonna look it up actually. My local town is Wiesbaden. Let me see. Probably hiding in plain sight somewhere.
It's probably there.
Board game cafe Wiesbaden. There's a hobby store.
Okay. Does it have a
Oh
cafe?
no, there is Brettspiel.
Yes. Go play Cascadia.
I would love to go play Castle. I'm going to take my kids to.
You should.
Well, actually, this is it's not a board game cafe. It's a group of people who meet in cafes. Interesting. I don't think anyone's actually. Mm, 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 mm. Interesting.
New
Okay,
business
I'm going to.
idea.
It'll be very German. It'll be very very rule based. I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And there's some games that really are, very, very strict and rule based. And we have some of those. There's a whole grouping of games called Euro games. And so there's certain types of games that are
Okay.
probably more popular there. We we don't get a lot of call for the Euro games because we in our cafe usually end up giving and teaching more of the casual games to our audience. But who knows? Hopefully they'll get into the Euro games,
What's a
which
Euro game exactly?
well, they take 2 or 3 hours and there's lots of setup and there's lots of rules and some of them are worker placement games, some of them are resource management games. They're all different types of games. But they tend to be quote unquote, air quotes, serious games. So I
Right.
love them. I love some of them, actually, not all of them. But there's
Well,
so and you know what? The biggest board game conference is in Germany, the Essen.
okay. Is that
So it's the center of the board game culture is in your country.
good Lord? And have you been to that one? To that
No.
conference? Okay.
Well, one day I will.
Interestingly, Essen is also where Equitana is, which is it'd be in exactly the same place, I'm sure, which is probably the world's biggest equestrian trade fair. And I'm often there. Yeah. So, okay, I'll go play games instead. Why not?
Yeah. Well, if we end up going to Essen, I will message you and we'll get together. We'll go.
It may by then not be too late because it depends. What time of year is it?
I don't remember. Hold on. I can look it up real fast.
While you're looking it up then, so listeners, to get together with your kids, apart from going into the forest and on safari and do things like that, go to a board game cafe. I like the idea of doing that too, not just sit at home and play board games, because it gets you out into the city, it gets you meeting people, it gets you exposed to different games, it gets you into a more social context. I'm going to start doing this with my kids.
You should. It's called Spiel Essen and it's in October.
Okay. The reason I ask is this October, we'll be moving to Spain. But
Come to Spain
you'll
and
just have to
visit.
come. We'll just have to play board games in Andalusia. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay. So now you're doing this, and you're also tell me, you got the World Schooling retreats. Tell me the name of your company and your project with teens and mental health.
Sure. So the World Schooling retreats are Project World School, and I work with teens online. I do private coaching and I teach courses, and that's through Transformative Mentoring for Teens.com. And I actually have a course coming up where I'm teaching teens to tap into their passions and purpose. I'm also teaching mindset and how to launch a business.
Oh, wow.
That's coming up in February, so I don't know when this is going to air, but if people are interested, please go to my website. I'm enrolling that now. And
Transformative Mentoring for Teens.com, Project World School. And just tell me the February deadline for
I
enroll
haven't date. It'll probably be somewhere around the 15th to launch the entrepreneur class. But
entrepreneur.
it's half mindset, half actual hands-on launching a project based on your passions and purpose.
Well, that to me actually is one of the most interesting points, because I'm a great believer that one of the things that has kind of destroyed the modern family is the destruction of the family business, whether
Yeah.
it's the family farm or the family, whatever the family business is, because a family business, like a family restaurant or a family shop or
Yeah.
whatever, everyone is involved. It's education, it's socialization, it's bonding, it's
Business.
business,
Yeah.
it's tribal life together, it's everything, and everyone's got the sort of joint endeavor
Yeah.
of the greater project all working together. And I'm a great believer in trying to have businesses with your family and with your kids. But I don't think it's something which is on most people's radars. I think that there's this idea, you've got to make the money. You send your kid to school so that your kid can go on and get a better job than you got, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And it's all rather isolating, instead of
I
saying, well, why not have a family economic unit, which you could then
Exactly.
branch out from, but it's always there for you if you want it.
Yeah. My son and I own two businesses together. So Project World School is our business, as well as Chongos Tres, which means
Tell me
three
about
months.
Chungo's Trace.
That's the board game cafe.
Ah,
Chongos.
okay.
Yeah,
Chungo's
that's
Chungo's monkey, right?
yeah.
Monkeys. Trace.
Yeah.
Oh, three monkeys.
Three
Trace.
monkeys.
Three monkeys. Got it. Okay. Why three monkeys?
Well, we wanted a brand that embodied playfulness, and monkeys do. And also the term, so mono is monkey in Spanish, but
Right.
chango is how you say monkey in Spanish, as well as you say dude or chango, like, oh, that thing happened, chango. So it's
Right.
kind of an expression as well. And at first, our brand was changos, 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 but then we just started calling it Changos Tres.
Ah, got it. Amazing. It's been really inspirational. I would say that, a thing there that really is perhaps not been made explicit in this podcast. And so I'd like to bring it sort of into the clear forefront, is this business of why not create a business with your team? Why
Yeah.
not create a business with your kid? Because so many things fall into perspective around that, right? When emotions and all of those other things start exploding all over the place, but yet you've still got to open the cafe and serve the customer. Yeah, it's good to have that focus, or the crop does need to go in the ground regardless, or we've still got to feed the horses right now. Let's argue about it while we feed the horses, but we got to
Yeah.
go feed the horses. And these things take you out of yourself to some degree. So it provides perspective taking. And you were talking about emotional intelligence. It's so interesting how emotional intelligence is so often tied up with economic intelligence, because of course, bad emotional intelligence makes for bad economic outcomes, right? And the opposite is true in the good way. Where's it going next for you, or what's the next project, do you think?
I don't know. They always seem to find me and things, I don't know, things unfold. I'd like to write a second book
Mm.
about
Oh,
just
tell me the
focus.
name of your book again so people can,
Yeah.
yes.
It's Seen, Heard, and Understood,
Seen, heard, and understood,
Parenting and Partnering with Teens for
and,
Greater Mental Health.
and partnering with teens. What's the last bit?
For greater mental health.
For greater mental health.
And also my son wrote the foreword to the book. It's wonderful. It's so touching what he wrote. It's so lovely.
And where's he at? Okay, you are running the business together, the
Yeah.
businesses together. Um, has he got other things he wants to go off and do at this point, or is he actually pretty content right now running this, or both, or what?
Well, he's also a writer, but he also just started developing his own board games. So
Okay.
he's really into that right now. I mean, and I think we just played two of his games in the cafe with other customers. And I really think he could publish this. They're so strong. He really has a grasp on game theory and playability and weight of pieces and cards and such. He's got it. Somebody's got to develop these games. Yeah.
Okay, so the next business is gaming. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's 25, be 26 in just a couple months. He
Mhm.
doesn't have to have a business with his mother. He doesn't have to be in partnership with me. But the fact that he chooses to really says something about this kind of partnership parenting and the joy of connection, right?
Partnership parenting.
Yeah. So that was going to be my next book will be on partnership parenting. Yeah.
Partnership parenting. Wonderful. Now, people can find you through your websites, transformativementoringforteens.com and Project World School. Can people also reach out to you on an email? I'm sure lots of people listening to this will have questions for you.
Sure, sure.
Can they reach you?
Yeah. Either of those sites have contact forms. You can find me on Facebook. Just look me up. You can find me lots of places.
Lainie Liberti. Okay. Project World School on
Yeah.
Facebook. All right. Perfect. Well, we've hit just past the 2-hour mark. This has been amazing. I'm so glad I got to learn a lot. It's great. It's wonderful thing about doing the podcast. Is that I get to ask everybody everything I want to ask, and I go away. Oh, that was a good idea. Oh, I think I'm going to do that. Oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that as well. So thank you so much. I mean, this has been massively enlightening. And yeah, for people who are just wondering how to break out of these negative patterns that I think they're so easy to fall into in familial environments, but they don't have to be. I think
Right.
I think a story like yours it's what's so inspiring about it is you probably run into a little bit of the same problems that I used to run into, where people would say, "Oh, you're saying that you're going to cure autism by going to see shamans in Mongolia and ride horses?" Like, no, of course I'm not saying. But what I am saying is, when the adventure in front of you comes up to do whatever that adventure is, if that's what your kid really wants to do, follow it. Follow your kid. And I've always found that if I do that, everything else will sort of fall into place around it. But as long as it's my agenda, things get complicated. And I think what you've really done is you've really shone a light on that. So you don't need to bugger off to Peru, and give up your job. It could be as simple as going and playing games with your kid and starting a bit of a business together or something. It could be a grand adventure. It could be a small adventure, but it's still an adventure. I think and as you said, you're talking about playfulness and the importance of that. What is adventure and curiosity but play? Yeah.
Very much. Yeah. Well said.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm inspired. I think we need to work together. I think that's the next thing. I think I'll be emailing you and yeah,
We'll do something.
see what we
We've
can cook up.
been threatening of doing something since we
Yes.
met.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. It's time. It's time. Thank you so much, Lainie. It's been absolutely brilliant.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you did, please help us to make more. Please like, subscribe, tell a friend, give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, please go to my website, rupertisaacson.com. And if you'd like to find out about our certification courses with autism, education, horsemanship, everyday shamanism, there's a whole range of cool stuff. Putting a show together like this is not an easy task. If you'd like to support us, please consider going to our Patreon page and showing us some love there. Even the smallest donation, it really helps us to keep the good content coming. So go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. Not to mention our excellent merch. Please go to our shop and check out some of our really cool rock and roll themed merch, t-shirts, hoodies, all that sort of thing. rupertisaacson.com, it's all there. I can't wait for our next guest and also to meet you there. In the meantime, remember, live free, ride free.